She trapped me against the rusted iron railing of the catwalk and demanded I surrender my control exactly when the security guard's flashlight beam was sweeping across the glass walls just 10 feet below us. I will never forget the deafening sound of the rain hammering against the Victorian glass roof of the Amazon dome, or the way the humidity instantly plastered my shirt to my skin, making me feel like I was suffocating in a beautiful green cage. It was past midnight, and a severe thunderstorm was battering the botanical gardens, turning the world outside into a chaotic blur of water and wind. Inside, however, it was a stifling 35 degrees Celsius with 90% humidity, a synthetic jungle designed to keep rare orchids alive. But tonight, it felt designed to kill me. I was Leo, a 23-year-old seasonal laborer on a scholarship, terrified of losing my job and desperate to fix a jammed pressure valve before the entire irrigation system failed. She was Elena, the 40-year-old wife of the director, the woman whose name was on the donor plaque by the entrance, the woman who walked through these gardens like she was the queen of a wilting kingdom. I was high up on a maintenance ladder, wrestling with a wrench, sweat dripping into my eyes, when I heard the heavy, metallic click of the main entrance door locking from the inside. I looked down. Elena was standing there in a trench coat, looking up at me not with concern for the leaking pipes, but with a cold, predatory curiosity that made my blood run hotter than the air around me. "The draft is bad for the Nepenthes, Leo," she called out, her voice cutting through the hum of the ventilation fans. She dangled a brass key on her finger, the master key that controlled every lock in the complex, before dropping it into the deep pocket of her coat. "And you are making a terrible amount of noise for such a quiet night." I froze, my grip on the wrench tightening until my knuckles turned white. This was strictly forbidden. No one was allowed in the dome after hours without the director's clearance, especially not without a security escort. If Marcus, her husband, and my boss found out we were alone in here, I wouldn't just be fired. I'd be blacklisted from every botanical program in the state. "Mrs. Vance," I stammered, starting to climb down, my boots slipping on the wet rungs. "I'm just fixing the valve. The pressure is spiking. I'll be done in 10 minutes. She didn't move away as I reached the bottom. She stepped closer. She smelled of rain and expensive, heavy jasmine perfume, a scent that clashed violently with the smell of wet earth and fertilizer. "Marcus is worried about the budget," she said, her eyes scanning my soaked uniform, lingering on the way the fabric clung to my chest. "He cares more about the cost of the water than the things the water keeps alive. He thinks you're incompetent, Leo. He told me he was going to let you go in the morning." The air left my lungs. The job was my lifeline. He can't," I whispered, panic rising. "I fixed the heating system last week. I'm the only one who knows how to calibrate the old boilers." Elena smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone holding all the cards. She reached out and touched the collar of my work shirt. Her fingers were cool, a shocking contrast to my feverish skin. She didn't pull away. She rubbed the fabric between her thumb and forefinger, inspecting the grease stain there. "I can change his mind," she murmured, stepping into my personal space until I was backed up against a towering monstera plant. "I manage the donor relations. I decide what stays and what gets cut. But I need to know if you're worth saving." The tension in the room shifted from professional fear to something primal. She wasn't talking about my gardening skills. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with the unsaid, amplified by the storm raging outside that isolated us from the rest of the world. I was trapped between the glass and her authority. Then, the beam of a high-powered flashlight slashed through the darkness outside, illuminating the wet glass panels right next to us. It was the night guard, doing his perimeter check. The light danced over the leaves, searching. I flinched, instinctively trying to duck, but Elena didn't flinch. She grabbed my belt, holding me in place. "Don't move," she hissed, her eyes locking onto mine. "If you run, you look guilty. If you stay—" She let the sentence hang. The flashlight beam moved on, missing us by inches. Then, the static of the radio on her belt crackled to life. It was Marcus. "Elena? Security says the lights are on in the Amazon wing. Are you in there? The sensors are showing a heart rate spike near the sensors." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was watching the telemetry. He knew someone was here. Elena looked at the radio, then at me. She didn't answer him. She reached down and clicked the volume knob off. The silence that followed was louder than the storm. "The tropical zone has strict regulations, Leo," she whispered, her hand moving from my belt to the buttons of my shirt. Standard uniform is not permitted above 30 degrees. You are overheating. I can feel it. Mrs. Vance, the valve. I choked out, my resistance crumbling under her gaze. The valve can wait, she commanded, undoing the top button of my shirt with a slow, deliberate movement. You cannot. Take it off. Before I could answer, a crack of thunder shook the ground, and a bolt of lightning struck the main power grid outside. The overhead lights died instantly, plunging us into absolute darkness, leaving only the sound of her breathing and the heat of her hand on my chest. The darkness that swallowed the Amazon dome wasn't empty. It was alive, hissing with the mechanical breath of the emergency systems. When the lightning struck, the main power died, but the backup generators kicked in instantly, not to restore the lights, but to engage the catastrophic failure protocol, the mist. Within seconds, jets of pressurized white vapor erupted from the floor and ceiling, filling the vast glass cathedral with a blinding, opaque fog designed to keep the tropical flora from drying out during a power loss. Visibility dropped to zero. I couldn't see the catwalk, the glass walls, or even my own hands, but I could feel Elena. She didn't recoil into the safety of the shadows. She advanced. She pushed me backward, her hands flat against my bare chest, guiding me blindly until my back hit the rough, damp bark of a massive kapok tree. The air was heavy, tasting of ozone and wet soil, a suffocating blanket that erased the rest of the world. Don't panic. Her voice came from the white void, dangerously close to my ear. The cameras can't see through high-density vapor. We are ghosts now, Leo. We don't exist. She wasn't afraid. While I was hyperventilating, terrified that the maintenance crews would burst in at any second, Elena was treating the catastrophe like a gift. She pressed her body against mine, the wet silk of her trench coat sliding against my skin, creating a friction that sent shockwaves through my nervous system. It was madness. We were standing in the middle of a workplace disaster, yet the only thing that mattered was the heat radiating from her. Marcus hates this place when it rains, she whispered, her fingers tracing the line of my abdominal muscles, exploring the tension there. He hates the dirt. He hates the humidity. He thinks nature is something to be contained behind glass. She paused, her breath hitching slightly as I instinctively gripped her waist to steady myself in the disorienting fog. He hasn't touched me in 2 years, Leo. Not like this. Not like something he's afraid to break. This was the confession, stripped of her usual arrogance. She wasn't just a bored wife playing a game. She was starving for contact, for something raw and unpolished. She pulled my head down, her lips brushing against my jawline, demanding a response. Make me feel real, she commanded softly, before the lights come back. For a moment, I forgot the job, the scholarship, and the director. The sensory overload of the mist, and her touch short-circuited my logic. I kissed her. It was desperate and clumsy, fueled by adrenaline and the terrifying realization that I didn't want to stop. We sank down onto the bed of mulch at the base of the tree, hidden in the swirling white clouds. But the sanctuary was an illusion. Click-clack. The sound of heavy tumblers shifting in the main door lock echoed through the dome like a gunshot. We froze. Then, bright, harsh beams of light cut through the fog from the outside, turning the white mist into a glowing, blinding wall. The exterior floodlights had been manually activated. Elena! A voice boomed from the entrance, muffled by the glass but unmistakable. It was Marcus. And he wasn't alone. I know you're in there. The security panel shows the internal lock is engaged. Open this door. Damn it, Elena hissed, pulling away from me instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold panic. He brought the donors. He's doing a flashlight tour to show off the storm protection systems. He's insane. She scrambled to her feet, smoothing her trench coat, her hand shaking for the first time. We have to unlock it, she whispered frantically. If he has to use the override key, he'll know someone locked it from the inside. He'll know it wasn't an accident. She reached into her deep pocket, the pocket where she had dropped the brass master key in part 1. She froze. She patted the pocket, then the other. Then she patted her chest. The key, she gasped, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. It's gone. What? I whispered, scrambling to my knees in the mulch. It fell out, she hissed, dropping to the ground beside me. When we went down, it fell out. We were on our hands and knees, frantically sweeping through the dark, wet with chips, our fingers brushing against roots and insects, searching for a small piece of cold brass that was the only thing standing between us and total destruction. The door handle rattled violently. "Elena!" Marcus shouted, his voice closer now, pressing against the glass. "I'm using the emergency master. Why is this jammed?" The key wasn't just a tool anymore, it was the evidence. If I found it, we could open the door and pretend I was working. If he found it on the floor later, after breaking in, he would know exactly why it was there. "I can't find it," I whispered, panic constricting my throat. "Keep looking," she ordered, clawing at the dirt. Then, through the swirling mist, we saw the shadow of a man on the other side of the glass doors. He raised a heavy object, a flashlight or a crowbar, and hammered on the frame. "Last chance," Marcus yelled. "I'm forcing the latch." Elena grabbed my wrist, stopping my search. Her eyes were wild. "Leave it," she breathed. "Get to the carnivorous wing. Hide behind the pitcher plants. I'll stall him. But the key? Go!" She shoved me into the fog. "I'll tell him I dropped it in the pond. Just go!" I scrambled into the narrow, suffocating corridor of the carnivorous wing just seconds before the heavy steel doors of the Amazon dome swung open behind me. This section of the greenhouse was a nightmare of biology compared to the lush paradise I had just fled. It was a cramped, dimly lit tunnel lined with shelves of Venus flytraps, sticky sundews, and hanging pitcher plants that smelled of sweet, rotting nectar. I wedged myself into the dark recess behind a towering display of Sarracenia, my back pressed against the cold glass of the outer wall, my chest heaving as I tried to stifle the sound of my own breathing. Through the gaps in the foliage, I saw the beams of heavy-duty flashlights cutting through the residual mist of the main dome. Marcus had entered, and he wasn't alone. "This way, ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, echoing off the glass, strained with suppressed rage but coated in a veneer of professional charm. "The storm has triggered our automated humidity protocols, which is why the visibility is low. But it provides a unique opportunity to see the ecosystem as it exists in the wild." A group of 4 wealthy donors in evening wear followed him, their expensive shoes clicking on the metal grates, looking out of place and annoyed. And trailing behind them, looking like a disheveled queen who had just survived a shipwreck, was Elena. She had buttoned her trench coat to her chin, hiding the evidence of our encounter, but her hair was wild, damp strands clinging to her flushed cheeks. She caught my eye through the leaves, a split-second glance into the darkness where I was crouching, and she didn't look afraid. She looked exhilarated. The group moved closer, stopping directly in front of my hiding spot. I was trapped. To my left was the solid glass wall. To my right, the path blocked by Marcus and the donors. If I sneezed, if the floor creaked, if a drop of sweat fell from my nose onto a dry leaf, my life was over. Marcus was shining his light on the pitcher plants, droning on about digestive enzymes, but his eyes were darting around the shadows, suspicious, hunting. He knew something was wrong. He could smell the pheromones and the chaos in the air. "Elena," he said sharply, turning the beam toward her, blinding her momentarily. "Explain to the board members how we feed these specimens. You spent so much time in here tonight, you must be an expert on their appetites." It was a trap. He was testing her composure. Elena didn't flinch. She stepped into the circle of light, dangerously close to where I was huddled. She placed a hand on the glass tank of a flytrap, her fingers inches from my face on the other side of the foliage. "They are opportunists, Marcus," she said, her voice low and husky, carrying a double meaning that hit me like a physical blow. "They wait for something foolish enough to wander into their territory. And once they taste the sugar on the rim, they don't let go. It's a violent process, but necessary for survival." She looked straight into the dark gap where I was hiding. It was a confession. She wasn't just talking about plants. She was telling me that she had no intention of releasing me. I was the prey, and she was the trap, and the danger of being devoured was the point of it all. I shifted my weight slightly, trying to relieve the cramp in my leg, and that's when I felt it, or rather, felt the absence of it. My hand brushed my chest. My lanyard. The heavy plastic ID badge with my photo, my full name, and my clearance level. It wasn't there. Panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. I looked down. In the erratic sweep of the flashlights, I saw a glint of plastic on the metal grating of the walkway, right in the center of the path, about 3 feet behind Marcus's heel. It must have been ripped off when I squeezed behind the display. It was lying there like a smoking gun. Leo Kastner, seasonal technician. If Marcus turned around, if he took one step back, if a donor looked down, they would see it. The symbol of my employment had transformed into the instrument of my destruction. It was no longer a pass to get in. It was the proof that I shouldn't be here. I watched, paralyzed, as Marcus turned to usher the group toward the exit. His shoe missed the badge by an inch. He stopped. He frowned. He looked down at the floor, his eyes narrowing. He had seen something. He began to lower his flashlight beam toward the ground. I had a choice. I could stay frozen, pray he missed it, and risk him finding the ID and then hunting me down with police dogs. Or I could sacrifice my anonymity to save the secret. I looked at Elena. She saw Marcus looking down. She saw the badge. Her eyes went wide with genuine fear for the first time. She couldn't stop him. I had to. I reached into the back pocket of my work pants and gripped the heavy steel wrench I had used on the valve, the tool I had carried with me this whole time. I took a breath, calculating the angle. I didn't aim at Marcus. I aimed at the far end of the greenhouse, toward a stack of fragile terracotta pots on a high shelf in the shadow. I swung my arm in a tight arc, releasing the steel with all my strength. Crash! The sound of shattering pottery exploded through the silent wing like a bomb blast. "What was that?" Marcus yelled, spinning around, his flashlight jerking away from the floor and my ID badge, pointing wildly toward the back of the room. The donor screamed. "It came from the orchid wall!" Elena shouted, seizing the moment, grabbing Marcus's arm and pulling him away from the badge. "The storm must have broken a window. The wind is knocking things over. Stay here." Marcus barked at the group, adrenaline taking over. He began to run toward the source of the noise, away from me, away from the evidence. Elena looked back at me one last time. She didn't mouth thank you. She pointed imperceptibly to the service hatch in the ceiling above my head, a ventilation shaft that led to the labs. Then, she turned and followed her husband, stepping squarely on my ID badge as she walked, sliding it under the heavy sole of her boot and kicking it into the darkness of the undergrowth, burying my name in the dirt. I tumbled out of the narrow metal service hatch and hit the polished linoleum floor of the research laboratory with a painful thud, gasping for air that didn't smell of rotting mulch and fear. The lab was a stark, blindingly white contrast to the humid jungle I had just escaped. It was a world of stainless steel, humming refrigerators, and sterile silence. I scrambled to my feet, wincing as I put weight on my left hand, which I had sliced open on the vent grating during my frantic crawl. Blood dripped onto the pristine white tiles, a stark crimson map of my guilt. I looked around wildly for a place to hide, but the room was exposed, filled with rows of microscopes and glass beakers. Before I could move, the electronic lock on the main door beeped. I froze, my heart stopping, preparing to be handcuffed by security. The door hissed open. It wasn't the police. It was Elena. She slipped inside, her chest heaving, her eyes wide and manic, and immediately slammed her hand against the emergency override button on the wall. The heavy steel shutters over the observation windows began to descend with a mechanical groan, sealing us inside a metal box. She didn't look at me. She marched straight to the chemical storage cabinet, unlocked it with trembling fingers, grabbed a vial of ammonium sulfide, and smashed it violently into the sink. The glass shattered, and instantly, the room was filled with a pungent, choking stench of rotten eggs, the universal scent of a chemical leak. "Don't speak," she commanded, coughing into her sleeve as she turned to face the door. Someone was pounding on it from the outside, heavy, authoritative fists. "Mrs. Vance! Open up! We have a breach report." It was the head of security. Elena leaned against the door, her voice transforming from breathless panic to a terrified, commanding scream. "Stay back! It's a sulfur containment failure. The storm surge cracked the pressure lines. I have a technician in here trying to neutralize it, but the fumes are toxic. Do not open this door unless you want to evacuate the entire city block." The pounding stopped instantly. There was a muffled exchange of voices on radios. Then the security chief's voice returned, sounding fearful. "Understood, ma'am. We are initiating a perimeter lockdown. Hazmat is 20 minutes out. Stay on the comms." The footsteps retreated rapidly down the corridor. We were alone. The lie had bought us time, but it had also trapped us. We were now locked in a contaminated zone, besieged by a lie that would eventually be discovered. Elena slumped against the door, sliding down until she hit the floor, burying her face in her hands. She looked small, fragile, and utterly exhausted. I walked over to the sink and turned on the tap to wash away the chemical stink, then looked at my phone. It was vibrating on the steel counter. A video call from my academic advisor. "Leo, where are you? The dorm warden says you never checked in. The storm warnings are serious. If I didn't answer, if I didn't return to the dorms, I would be flagged. My scholarship depended on a clean record and strict curfew adherence." I looked at Elena, sitting on the floor in her ruined trench coat, her hair a mess, risking a felony charge to keep me in the room with her. The choice wasn't rational, it was visceral. I picked up the phone. I didn't answer. I didn't make an excuse. I swiped the power off slider. The screen went black. I severed the tie to my safety, to my future, to the version of myself that followed rules. I was no longer a student, I was a co-conspirator. I walked over to Elena and sat down beside her on the cold floor. She looked up, seeing the blood on my hand. Her eyes softened, the hard shell of the director's wife cracking open to reveal the lonely woman underneath. She took my hand gently, inspecting the cut. "I didn't lose the key," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I threw it away. In the pond." "Why?" I asked, the single word hanging in the chemically tainted air. She pulled a first aid kit from under the counter and began to dress my wound, her touch clinical yet incredibly tender. "Because I didn't want the door to open," she confessed, not looking at me. "Do you know what my life is, Leo? I am the curator of a collection I am not allowed to touch. Marcus loves the idea of this garden. He loves the prestige. He loves the donors. But he doesn't feel it. He looks at a rare orchid and sees a tax write-off. He looks at me and sees the same thing." She finished bandaging my hand and pressed her lips to the white gauze, a gesture of reverence that shook me to my core. "Tonight in the mist, when you held me, I felt like I was growing again. Like I wasn't just an ornamental fixture in a glass box." It was a devastating truth. She had staged a disaster, lied to the authorities, and trapped us in a room filled with fumes just to feel human for one night. The external danger was closing in. The hazmat team was coming. Marcus would review the security tapes. The morning sun would expose everything. But in that sterile lab, the only thing that felt real was the heat of her hand holding mine. "We can't stay here," I said softly, though I made no move to stand up. "When hazmat opens that door, they'll know there was no leak. They'll know we lied." Elena stood up, pulling me with her. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. She walked to the back of the lab, to the freight elevator that led to the underground seed vault. She punched in a code I had never seen before. "Let them find an empty room," she said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "This elevator goes down to the old archives. It exits into the service tunnels under the city. It's dirty, it's dark, and it's the only way out." She stepped into the elevator and held the door open, looking at me. It was a ticket to the underground, literally and metaphorically. "Come with me, Leo. I can't promise you a job tomorrow, but I can promise you that tonight isn't over." I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing us in darkness as we began to descend into the earth, leaving the surface world behind. The freight elevator descended with a shuddering, metallic groan, carrying us down past the foundations of the greenhouse and into the suffocating silence of the old subterranean archives. The air here was stale, smelling of wet concrete and decades of neglect, a stark difference from the chemical sting of the lab above. When the doors rattled open, revealing a dimly lit corridor lined with rusting filing cabinets and encroaching tree roots that had burst through the cement walls, we didn't run. We stopped. The adrenaline that had fueled our escape suddenly curdled into a heavy, undeniable exhaustion mixed with a raw, desperate need. We were buried alive, hidden beneath the city, saved from hazmat teams and angry husbands. Elena pushed me against the cold concrete wall, her hands trembling as they gripped the lapels of my ruined work shirt. "This is the root system," she whispered, her voice echoing in the darkness. "This is where the real work happens. In the dark. Where no one looks." It was the culmination of the night's madness. There were no more cameras, no more glass walls, no more pretending. In the shadows of the archive, amidst the dust of forgotten botanical history, we sealed our pact. It wasn't a romantic union of souls. It was a collision of two desperate species finding a way to survive in a hostile environment. We clung to each other with a ferocity that terrified me, erasing the fear of the morning with the absolute certainty of the present moment. I realized then that I wasn't just a lover to her. I was the oxygen she needed to breathe in her airless marriage, and she was the sunlight I needed to grow in a world that ignored me. The reckoning came at dawn. We emerged from the service tunnel exit near the compost yards, just as the sun was breaking through the gray storm clouds. The flashing lights of the fire department were still reflecting off the glass dome in the distance. Marcus was there, standing by the rear gate, looking haggard, furious, and terrified of a PR scandal. He saw us approaching, me, dirty and bloodied, and Elena, pale but composed. I braced myself for the handcuffs, for the shouting, for the end of my life. But Elena stepped forward before I could speak. She didn't apologize. She attacked. "You should thank him," she said, her voice icy and imperious, pointing at me. "The chemical containment system failed because of your budget cuts, Marcus. Leo stayed behind. He manually sealed the intake valves while breathing in fumes that could have killed him. He saved the entire western wing from contamination while you were busy giving tours." Marcus blinked, stunned. He looked at me, then at the heroic blood on my hand, then at his wife's fierce defense. He saw a way out. He saw a narrative that protected his reputation. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a calculating relief. He walked over to me, not to fire me, but to shake my hand. "Good work, son," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. We'll keep this quiet. No need to involve the press. The board will hear about your dedication." Elena stood behind him, her face a mask of tragedy, but as our eyes met, the corner of her mouth quirked upward in a microscopic, victorious smile. We hadn't just survived, we had won. 2 weeks later, the botany department was quiet. The storm damage had been repaired, the glass replaced, and the rumors of a chemical leak had faded into campus legend. I was no longer the seasonal laborer scrambling for hours. I had a new title, authorized personally by the director. Head of Nocturnal Operations. It was a glorified title for a night watchman, but it came with a significant pay raise and, more importantly, a set of heavy brass keys that opened every door in the complex, including the private elevators. I sat in the control booth of the Amazon Dome, watching the monitors. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. The garden was asleep, bathed in the blue glow of the moonlight filtering through the glass. Marcus was away at a conference in Geneva, a trip Elena had insisted he take to relax after the stress. I was alone in the kingdom. Or so it seemed. I picked up the logbook to sign off for the night, but when I opened it, I found a new entry written in elegant, familiar cursive. It wasn't a maintenance request. It was a set of coordinates for the temperature control system. Override protocol, tropical storm. Midnight. I looked at the digital clock. 11:59. My heart began to race with that familiar, addictive rhythm. I wasn't just guarding the plants anymore. I was tending to something much more volatile. I stood up and walked to the edge of the catwalk, looking down into the dark, silent jungle. The clock struck midnight. With a hiss of hydraulic pressure, the automated misting system engaged. Massive plumes of white vapor erupted from the floor, swirling and rising like living spirits, swallowing the trees, the paths, and the cameras in a thick, impenetrable fog. Visibility dropped to zero. The world became a blank canvas. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, watching the white cloud consume the dome. And then I saw it. At the far end of the greenhouse, emerging from the wall of white mist like a phantom, was a silhouette. She was wearing the trench coat. She stopped in the center of the path, looking up toward the catwalk where I stood. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. She simply reached up and slowly, deliberately, unbuttoned the coat, letting it slide off her shoulders and disappear into the fog. I turned from the railing and began to descend the ladder into the white abyss, stepping into the heat, ready to burn.